To the modern world, Joan of Arc may appear to be nothing more than a devout young woman whose faith clouded her perception of reality. A religious zealot led to a tragic demise. Yet, regardless of how polarized opinions may be, she remains one of the greatest heroines in French history. A country in chaos. To understand her impact, one must first understand the chaos into which she was born. 14th-century France was a fractured kingdom, ravaged by internal strife and foreign invasion. The root of the turmoil lay in the royal Plantagenet family, rulers of England since the 12th century, who had French blood and claimed the right to rule both kingdoms. In contrast, the Valois dynasty ruled France and saw these claims as heretical. The inevitable result, a war that would rage for over a century, the 100 Years' War. But foreign invasion was only part of France's woes. The throne itself was the subject of bloody disputes. Charles VI, the reigning king during Joan's birth, was notoriously known as Charles the Mad, and rightly so. His recurring bouts of insanity left a power vacuum quickly filled by his brother, Duke Louis of Orleans, and his cousin, Duke John the Fearless of Burgundy. Their rivalry plunged the country into civil war. In 1407, Louis was assassinated by John's order, sparking further bloodshed. France was collapsing from within, just as England prepared its next assault. King Henry V of England capitalized on this internal collapse, claiming victory after victory. Meanwhile, the French heir, Charles VII, only 14 at the time, struggled to unify his forces. In a desperate move to form an alliance, he invited the Burgundians to negotiate. However, when his allies assassinated a key Burgundian figure during peace talks, the Duke of Burgundy allied with the English instead. In 1420, Queen Isabeau of Bavaria signed the Treaty of Troyes, disinheriting her son, Charles VII, and recognizing Henry V as the future king of France. France's map was being redrawn under foreign rule. France on the brink. By 1429, most of northern France was in English or Burgundian hands. The city of Reims, where kings were traditionally crowned, was under enemy control. The English were marching on Orleans, the last barrier to the heart of France. Despair was everywhere. But a prophecy from the wizard Merlin echoed through the minds of the desperate. France will be lost by a woman and saved by a maiden from the borders of Lorraine. If Queen Isabeau was the woman who doomed France, then who was the maiden destined to save it? The call from heaven. In 1412, in the small village of Domremy near Lorraine, Jeanne d'Arc was born to Jacques d'Arc and Isabelle Romee. Her family were peasants who farmed a modest plot of land. Jeanne never learned to read or write. Education was reserved for boys and nobles, but she was deeply devout. Religion was her only access to the larger world, and she absorbed every sermon and story of saints and angels with fierce conviction. At age 12, Joan claimed to hear a voice while alone in the fields. It was the Archangel Michael, followed by Saints Catherine and Margaret. They told her she had been chosen by God to drive out the English and crown the true king of France. Though terrified, she believed in her divine mission. "I would rather stay by my mother and sew," she once said. "But I must go, for my Lord wills it." The road to glory. At 16, Joan traveled to Vaucouleurs, seeking permission from the local commander to meet the Dauphin, Charles VII. She was laughed off, but she returned the following year with support from 2 local knights. When she correctly predicted a French defeat at the Battle of the Herrings, she was finally granted an escort to the court at Chinon. Disguised as a man to avoid enemy patrols, Joan rode through enemy territory and gained an audience with the Dauphin. He tested her by disguising himself among his courtiers, but Joan immediately recognized him. Her boldness impressed the court. Religious scholars interrogated her and found nothing heretical. Still, she was a peasant girl with no military training. How could she be given command? Historian Stephen Ritchie explained, after years of crushing defeats, France was desperate. The nobles had failed. Logic had failed. Perhaps faith could win the war. Charles VII agreed. Joan was given armor, a sword, a banner, and troops. The Siege of Orleans. On April 29, 1429, Joan arrived in Orleans. The military leaders distrusted her and kept her out of meetings. But she inserted herself onto the battlefield. Some claim her role was purely symbolic. Others argue she possessed true strategic genius. What cannot be denied is that after months of stagnation, French forces began to win once she arrived. On May 4th, Joan led a successful assault on enemy outposts. She demanded further attacks, even when denied entry to strategy meetings. On May 7th, despite being wounded by an arrow to the neck, she returned to the front lines and led a final charge that captured the city. Her victories transformed morale. Once mocked, she became a symbol of divine favor. Soldiers rallied behind her. Inspired, Charles VII granted her command over a bold campaign, a march to Reims through enemy territory. Astonishingly, within 2 months, Reims surrendered without bloodshed. On July 17, 1429, Charles VII was crowned King of France. Joan stood beside him, banner in hand. Betrayal and captivity. But politics soon returned to the fore. Joan begged to push on to Paris, but the court delayed. Weeks later, when the assault finally began, it failed, partly due to lack of support. Joan was injured again, but refused to retreat. Ultimately, the king ordered a ceasefire. By May 1430, Joan was in Compiègne, defending the city from a combined English-Burgundian siege. While covering her army's retreat, she was captured. Her family could not afford a ransom, and Charles VII made no effort to rescue her. The Burgundians sold her to the English. The trial of a saint. The English organized a trial for heresy, not to judge her soul, but to discredit her and, by extension, Charles VII's right to rule. The trial was a farce. Judges were biased or coerced. Records were doctored, under threat of torture, and unable to read. Joan signed a confession she couldn't understand. But she would not betray her faith. She wore men's clothing in prison, either to deter abuse or because her clothes had been taken. That alone was used as evidence of relapse into heresy. The martyrdom. On May 30th, 1431, Joan was led to the stake in the marketplace of Rouen. She was only 19. As the flames rose, she asked for a cross to be held high so she could see it. "I die because I spoke the words of angels," she said. "I fear nothing, for God is with me." To prevent any relics from being taken, her ashes were burned twice more and cast into the river Seine. Legacy. Joan's death did not end the war, but her example reshaped it. 22 years later, the war concluded with Charles VII still on the throne. England lost nearly all its French territories. Joan, once vilified, was vindicated. A retrial in 1456 declared her innocent. Over a century later, she became a symbol of Catholic pride. In 1920, the Church canonized her as a saint and one of France's 9 patron saints. Today, her legacy lives in churches, literature, and video games alike, from Age of Empires 2 to Fate/Grand Order. Even in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, the Jeanne d'Arc Church stands as a tribute. She was a farmer's daughter, illiterate, yet led armies and shifted history. Not because she sought glory, but because she believed she must. That is Joan of Arc, the Maiden of Orleans. The saint on the stake. The woman who saved France.